We'll see.
All right, thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Brittany and I am the coordinator for the Crow Wing County Master Gardener Volunteer Program. We are again doing a hybrid presentation. So I'm here live at the Brainerd Library and we just have our last few people coming in, and then we're also on Zoom. And so please, I'll be monitoring the chat. I'm using my phone, which I named moderator, to keep an eye on the chat. Otherwise I mess up my view. So for the most part, I'll let Jackie go, but I'll ask questions towards the end and we'll hopefully get everybody's covered. We did this presentation a couple years ago, and I think we had close to 200 people on Zoom, and there was a lot of questions and it was pretty crazy. So but I think this time is going to be more manageable, and I know Jackie will probably answer a lot of your questions as she goes. So without further ado, we have Jackie Burkey joining us today. She's been a master gardener. Jackie, I'm going from memory. I think it's since 2007 that you joined. And she spent a lot of years in Texas and then came back to her hometown of Brainerd. And she's excited to be back in Minnesota, where we have seasons and good soil. She's really knowledgeable about composting, and including vermicomposting, which is composting with worms, and is kind of our resident rose, dahlia, and houseplant expert. So thank you, Jackie.
Expert is, I use the term loosely, and Brainerd is my dad's hometown. I'm a Twin Cities girl, but welcome everybody. We'll roll through this and hopefully answer questions. We've gotten a couple of questions actually pre-presentation, so we'll see if those get covered too. But today we'll talk about houseplants because it's houseplant season now, because we're obviously not going to be doing anything outside. So, okay, let's make this work. Well, so why do we want to grow plants? Well, because we can't do it outdoors for half the year up here. They're pretty. It's a lot of fun. It can keep you very busy depending on how much you get into it. And we'll talk about whether they clean the air or not. So what do houseplants need? In order to survive, they need light, water, soil, fertilizer, and pest control. Now, I'm going to give you the science-based information that the university and some other science-based places provide. My sister reminded me this morning, my other sister, not the one who's sitting there, that she does everything in the exact opposite of what I say, and her plants grow like crazy. Her Thanksgiving cactus has been blooming since Halloween, and she does everything wrong, and her plants are better than mine. So, you know, I'm giving you the information and you can take it or leave it, but on we go. Okay, so light is probably the biggest problem with growing houseplants. That's my problem. First thing we did when we moved into this old house was put in new windows, and we put in the really good ones with all the coatings on them and everything, which of course they don't let in all the spectrum of light that I need in order to grow good houseplants. Plus, I don't have all that many windows that face south. So it turns out that intensity is the most important part of it. It influences the stems, the leaves, the color, and the flowers. Especially if you're going to have flowering plants, you need good light. Duration is how long the plants are exposed to light. If you just have the sun passing the window for an hour, you're probably in trouble. And then the quality, what part of the spectrum that light is. I've gotten an arrow garden. If you've seen those, you can grow like lettuce and basil and things like that. And it's LED lights. And there are just a few blue LEDs and a couple of red LEDs, just enough to give those plants the part of the spectrum that they need additionally for good photosynthesis. So you've probably seen plants like this or have plants like this. They're reaching for the light. So they get long spaces between the nodes. The leaves tend to be smaller. They're just weak. If it's a flowering plant, they might produce buds, but they will probably drop without opening if there's not enough light. The leaves will start to fall off if it gets really bad. And if you have a variegated plant, part white and part green on the same leaf, or part yellow on the same leaf, without light, they're probably going to turn all green because the plant is trying to maximize how much green chlorophyll it has in order to photosynthesize. You can add lights, do supplemental lights. Here's a really nifty display. But the problem with doing this is then they aren't in your living room or kitchen or wherever you want to have your plants. Yeah, you can grow plants, but if they aren't where you live, who cares? Cool white shop light, fluorescent lights work great for providing light for indoor growing. There are a lot of new LED tubes, fixtures, and they're of course way more efficient. So those, I'm going to switch to those if I ever use up my box of 4-foot 40-watt tubes. There are special grow lights that have the, more of the blue light or whatever. They're pretty expensive, and the research shows that they don't give you that much of an advantage. If you wanted to have like one grow light and one cool white, that works too. But full-on grow bulbs aren't that necessary. The trick is to keep the lights close to the plants, 6 to 8 inches from the plants. You don't want the plants rubbing up against them. But if they're too far away, the light just gets too weak and too dispersed, and it's not really going to help the leaves. But you can also give your plants too much light, and then they essentially are getting sunburned. You get brown tips, the leaves might fade. They truly look like they're sunburned. You can see the edges get a little bit crispy, and you can't come back from that. Once you have a brown crispy leaf, that crispy part isn't going to suddenly rejuvenate and turn green. So once you get crispy leaves, that leaf is done. So duration is more important than intensity. So for pure foliage plants, 12 to 16 hours a day. Things like African violets don't need quite as much, but you can't grow a African violet that's going to flower if you have it, way away from the window and it's not getting any light. They're always sold as low light plants, but they need some light in order to do well. And if you've made cuttings, even cuttings need to have 10 to 12 hours a day in order to form their roots. So light is important. And then secondly, water is probably the most important thing. But the number one killer of houseplants is drowning. We all love our plants and we want to take care of our plants. And every time we walk by them, we want to water them a little bit. And that's about the worst thing you can do. So how often should you water? Well, my dopey sister does it once a week on schedule, no matter what, and she gets away with it. So, but generally, the type of plant you have, the type of container you have, how humid is your house, how warm is your house, is it a new baby plant or is it a great big monster plant, and what kind of potting medium is it growing in? Those will all affect how often you have to water. So we'll talk about some tips. Room temperature water is really important. You don't want to shock them, go out and melt some snow and then bring it in and immediately water the plants. And of course, you don't want hot water. It'll scald the roots. So room temperature, rainwater, if you can get it. If you've got a rain barrel, it's wonderful. All summer long, I use the rainwater because it doesn't have all the chemicals and calcium and things like that in it. It's relatively pure, although it's always shocking how much dirt is in the bottom of the watering can when you're using rainwater. But rainwater, and of course in the winter you can melt snow if you've got clean snow. Don't use softened water. The salt isn't going to do your plants any good. Small amounts, okay. And then the trick is to take them periodically and just flush the whole plant with a lot of water to rinse out all the excess salt. But if you can stay away from softened water, that's better. Chlorinated water should sit for 24 hours. The chlorine gas will evaporate out of the water, and your plants just don't need the chlorine. Fluoride is going to cause brown tips on spider plants and palm fronds. Fluoride will not dissipate by sitting around. Fluoride's in there and it's going to stay in there. So up until the past, what, 6 or so months, we had a non-fluoridated tap in Brainerd. So I would always go over there in the winter and get some of that water to use when I ran out of my water I'd saved from the rain barrels. But they're not chlorinating the fluoride tap now, or the non-fluoride tap. So it's been turned out, because most people, the anti-fluoride crowd, was getting their drinking water there. But because it's not chlorinated now, it's not safe. So that's why rainwater, snow water, or if you have friends who have well water that's not fluoridated, you know, take your 5-gallon jugs over there and fill them up for your houseplants. Should you water from the top or the bottom? It's up to you. I water from the top because I can see how much is going in. But if you water from the bottom, you let the plants stand in water for a while, and then you have to take the saucer or whatever they're in and drain that off. Don't ever let them stand in water. And if you have things with hairy leaves like African violets or some of the begonias and things, or things with a crown, a lot of succulents, things like that, don't get water down in there. It'll rot. And the main tip is to let the soil dry out in between waterings. If you just keep watering and always keep it wet, the roots need to have access to air. And if all of the spaces in the soil are filled with water, then the roots aren't getting any air. So then they suffocate essentially and drown. So you gotta let the roots get some air once in a while. So let it dry out. You can also tell you've overwatered. The leaves will turn yellow and drop. Now, if you walk by that plant, you'd probably think, oh dear, that plant needs a drink of water, because that's part of the problem. The symptoms look startlingly the same. But there are some other hints. You can look for edema, which is when you have too much water. The underside of the leaves will start leaking out that excess water. And hang on. And that leaves behind, sometimes you can actually see the little drops of water underneath the leaf. But it also leaves behind any of the chemicals, the iron or the calcium. So if you see little deposits of powdery things on the bottom underside of the leaf, that's probably from being overwatered. When the plant gets really desperate, it'll start growing adventitious roots up above the surface of the soil. It's just trying to get some oxygen and reestablish itself. And you know, like this plant, it'll look wilted even when the soil is wet. And so if you stuck your finger into this plant and it was soaking wet and still looked like that, you'd know it was overwatered. So the symptoms of underwatering, you get the dry, crispy leaves. They'll turn brown and die. Or if you have a plant like peace lilies, frequently when they're thirsty, they just completely collapse down. They just completely wilt down. And you give them a drink of water and they spring right back up in about 15 minutes. But that's hard on the plant to keep, you know, not dying, but dehydrating and then rehydrating. So don't let it get to that point. But the plant gets stunted and woody if it goes through that too many times. So humidity, 30% in the home is good. We don't want our homes to get too humid, because then we start having mold problems and allergy problems, things like that. But the plants, of course, would like it more humid. Tropical plants especially, and a lot of our houseplants are tropicals. Cacti and succulents don't need it quite as humid. But don't mist. I mean, any show, anything you watch, they'll be going around misting the plants all the time. But misting leaves that water on the leaves, and it makes the plant very susceptible to leaf spot diseases. And yes, it provides humidity, but you're opening yourself up to a lot of other harder to cure problems. So it's better to increase the humidity by placing the plants on pebble-filled trays. You don't want the plants to be sitting in water, but if you have them raised above a tray of water, then as that water is evaporating, it goes up through the leaves of the plant or up through the plants. If you group your plants together, they all are kind of giving off and sharing the humidity. If you have a room humidifier or a full house humidifier, that of course helps. If you have some plants that need really high humidity, I'm successfully still growing can't think of the name of it, but like a pitcher plant. So have to feed it a bug once in a while. And I've never had one last more than 2 or 3 weeks, but I've got mine inside a big 2-liter Coke bottle that, cut the bottom off and made like a terrarium over the top. And it's very happy in there. Doesn't look too cool, but it's alive. If you put it in a terrarium, like an old aquarium, put a piece of glass over the top, or you can, there are all sorts of things sold for terrariums, or like the cloche, the glass bell shaped things you could put over plants. That keeps the humidity in. Or bottom line, just use plants that aren't so fussy, that'll tolerate the low humidity. So fertilizing, we talk about NPK, the nitrogen for the healthy leaves, the phosphorus for the fruits and seeds, and the potassium just for overall vigor. So too much fertilizer, it's always the too much of a good thing. A little bit is good, a lot is not. Why am I still seeing this? But the leaves will get all hard and crunchy, and you can tell this bottom one is scorched on the edges because the fertilizer moves out to the edges and just fries it. You might get oddly shaped leaves. These are looking real bad. And once again, the plant will wilt even though it's wet. And you'll know if you over fertilized it because you were the one who over fertilized it. So if it's lacking fertilizer, it tends to get pale. Like this one is lacking nitrogen because it's just doesn't have enough to supply the photosynthesis process. If plant gets desperate, it'll start losing leaves. It probably won't flower, and you'll get some stunted growth. You can tell these leaves are smaller than the bottom ones. And if you go into the store or the nursery, you'll see just shelves of fertilizer. So how do you know what one to pick? Well, you can start with organic ones, things like fish emulsion. They're very mild, unlikely to burn. First time I ever bought fish emulsion, I just about had to move out of my apartment. It got so smelly. I think they've done some things to some of the fish emulsions so they don't stink quite as much, but be wary if you use fish emulsion. I use my worm compost. That's an organic, and that works really well. Then there's the inorganics, all the chemical ones, all the trade names. They're granular. You dissolve them in water, or you apply them, dig them into the soil. The plus of them is they're available immediately because they are the chemical, and it doesn't have to go through any organic breakdown to be available. It's the chemical. It's available to the plant. The danger, of course, is over fertilizing. Then you have the time release pellets. You've seen those, the little round thing, like Osmocote is probably the most well-known one, but there's lots of different brands. And that slowly releases over several months. A lot of the potting soils you buy will have that in them already. Every time you water it, the water takes out some of the chemical. But above all, you only fertilize during the growing season. So right now, in the middle of winter, you don't want to fertilize your plants at all. We don't have enough light for them to be actively growing. It's cooler. It's just that it's not the time when they're putting out new growth, so they don't need to be fertilized. Shoot, I can't see the top of my slide here, but the plants in the soilless media need to be fertilized more frequently just because they have no nutrients. But also make sure and check if that media already has fertilizer. Because if you start adding fertilizer, that adds too much. So when the fertilizing season starts, like in March, if you fertilize every 2 weeks with half the amount, then you probably won't risk burning if you're using the inorganic. Again, March through September. And if you're growing under fluorescent lights where they're really getting more light, then they may need to be fertilized more often. Brittany, how can I get rid of this, do you think? There's a bar going across on here.
Is it, what part of your screen is it on? Is it on the top?
It's right where that top line is right now.
Is it, it shouldn't be anything on my end. Let's see.
It just appeared a few things ago. Oh, well, whatever
You
that.
want to try leaving your presentation and sharing again?
Do we dare do that? Or just tell me what the top line says. Something about
It
foliage.
says fertilizing continued. Flowering plants require more nutrients than foliage
The
plants.
flowering ones will need a little bit more because the flowering plants are in the business of making seeds ultimately. So they're going to need more nutrition in order to go through the whole process. And if you're using like a liquid, something you've dissolved in water or whatever, make sure you fertilize the entire soil. That you don't just pour a little on top and call it good. Make sure you let enough flow through so that even the roots down at the bottom are getting fed. And then of course, don't let it stand in any of that. Oops. So we'll talk about soil. So
Jackie,
yeah,
before you go on, there's one question about fertilizer.
Okay.
Would you fertilize plants that are old adult that haven't been fertilized before?
Yeah, they're probably starving.
Okay.
Because
But wait till spring.
You tend to use up the nutrients that are in the soil have probably been used up if it's a really old plant and hasn't been repotted for quite a while. So it's probably desperately hungry. You could even give it just a tiny touch right now, maybe even to just keep it going. Okay. Anything else?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. So we have soil. Now there's hydroponic gardening and we don't need soil for hydroponics, but that's for another day. So we're going to be talking about growing plants in soil. So you need the soil to hold the plant in place, to anchor the roots. And the plants are getting a lot of nutrients and minerals from that soil. And the air is getting to the roots, the oxygen, unless you're drowning it. Soilless mixes are not potting soil. So this, I think this is always confusing because they're kind of used interchangeably, potting mix and potting soil. But a true potting mix is sterile. It doesn't contain anything, I can't say natural, but it doesn't contain any dirt is what we would think of. You know, it doesn't contain any of the minerals and clay and things like that that would be part of a potting soil. It usually has some of that. So if you're starting things, just taking cuttings and going to grow them right in the potting mix, it's sterile. You won't be exposing your plants to pathogens or other potential problems. It's usually composed of peat moss, bark, vermiculite, which is the expanded mineral, and perlite is the little white hard things that you'll see in the soil when you buy it. Can be clay, which is like cat litter. It might be charcoal, lime, or even sand, especially in the succulent mixes. So containers are pretty important, actually, because you don't want your container to detract from your plant. So you need it large enough to hold enough soil. You know, occasionally you'll see some big giant plant in a little tiny pot, and it's like, oh, that's going to tip over. And it needs to have enough soil to support the life of that plant too. So get the right size. But you need to leave a little headspace at the top. If the soil's coming all the way up to the top of the container, then there's no room when you're watering. You're going to have the soil spilling over the top. So leave a little headspace at the top. You want a non-toxic container. You don't want it putting something leaching from the container into your plants, especially if you're doing any kind of edible. But you need drainage, and it needs to be pretty, but it doesn't need to be prettier than your plant. So clay is sort of the old ancient pots, the clay pots. They're heavy. They tend to break, crack, especially if they go through any kind of freeze-thaw cycle, they're going to break. And the biggest detriment to using them is they dry out really quickly. Now, if you tend to be an overwaterer, it might be a good thing to use a clay pot. But if you're using clay pots, you have to really pay attention and stay on top of the watering situation. Plastic pots, of course, are everywhere. They're cheap, they're lightweight, all sorts of colors. Ceramic pots are beautiful. They can be heavy. The biggest problem with them may be that there's no drainage hole in the bottom. So you can drill one. I've done that a number of times. Pro tip, if it's possible, drill from the inside, because you're probably going to crack away some of that ceramic. And if that's on the inside, it won't show. I've done that. And you're on the risk of breaking it. But if you use something like a masonry drill, something like that is more likely to be successful. Start with the smallest hole you can make. You can always enlarge it. But be careful. Take it slowly. Resin and fiberglass pots, there's a lot more of those than there used to be. They're lightweight and they're very tough, and they're easy to drill a hole in if there's not a hole. Bamboo is kind of one of the new things for pots. They're usually quite colorful, like this one at the bottom. The downside of the bamboo is that and I've had mine last quite a few years, so it's not like it's going to break down the first year, but they will eventually sort of dissolve, conk out. So don't put a plant in there that you don't intend to repot for 5 years. But bamboo, of course, is highly renewable, so it's a good material for things like pots. You can double pot, especially if you're using something like the clay pot. Have an outer pot that's bigger, or the outer pot is the pretty pot, and you just put a simple pot on the inside. Then when you water, you can lift out the inner one and put it in the sink so that the excess can drain out, or put a good layer of pebbles or gravel or something in the bottom, not in the bottom of the pot that has the plant in it, but in the bottom of the second pot, so that it's raised up, so that if there is a little bit of standing water in the bottom, it wouldn't be keeping the soil wet. And then if you they're putting sphagnum moss in between, and if you put a layer of that over the whole top of the whole thing, you couldn't even tell that it was double potted. But that's a good way to, especially if you're using a really pretty fancy pot, or don't want to drill a hole in whatever it is. Double pot is the way to go. So how do you know when to repot? Well, when the plant is just completely out of proportion, just hanging over the edges or gotten too big. Or if the roots are coming out of the bottom of the hole like crazy, or sometimes they'll even come out of the top of the planter if they're looking for air. If you're watering and you're watering all the time and the plant still looks like it's dried up, that's because there's no room for the water in there. I had that happen. I bought an Easter cactus, and I was just constantly watering it, and I hadn't bought it that long ago, but it just wouldn't take on any water. So I finally dumped it out, and it was just the most solid root ball. So I cut it all up with a knife. Now I have 3 Easter cactuses, but I think Brittany has one she got at the plant sale. Um, but they have to have some, soil in there. They can't be just total roots. And if the plant just doesn't respond to anything you do, if it isn't taking up water, if it's not growing, it's time to repot. So how do we repot? Water it before you ever start. The plant will probably release from the old pot more easily and you'll do less damage to the roots. Take a pot that's 1 or 2 inches larger in diameter. That's 1 to 2 inches total. You know, you got 2 sides you're looking at. Cover the hole with something, coffee filter, whatever, that will let the water out, but keep the dirt in. Tap it or run a knife around. And then this is a fairly critical step, is set the pot on its side and slide the plant out. If you do the old yank it out, for a lot of plants, there's a risk of you'll yank off the top, and the whole root is staying in the bottom. So if you lay it down, if it's not sliding, you can, whack it a few times, whatever, but there's less risk of you separating the top from the bottom. And then if it's just this massive roots, then cut a bunch of them off, give it a good haircut, especially ones that are going round and round, circling, and any that are soft, mushy, black, brown, cut those off. It rejuvenates it. And if you do enough root pruning, then you don't actually need to go to a bigger pot, because now you've got room in the potting mix for the smaller root ball. There's a cat trying to pop out underneath here, so if I suddenly tip over, it's her fault. Okay, so potting, place it at the same level. So like with this plant, if you put it down in deeper, then these crowns of the plant are going to be buried in the soil. You don't want that. You want them to still be visible. So hold the plant up there, put enough soil underneath it to keep it at that level. Tap it in lightly, and then water it in well so there aren't any air pockets, that it all gets settled in, and so that you've got enough soil in the pot. That tends to be my problem. I come back 2 days later and it's like, oh, I need more soil. But and then don't put it back into bright, hot, shining light for a few days. Let it get used to its new situation. And the other thing with when you're repotting, cut things apart. Well, we'll get to that here a little bit later too, but don't be afraid of your plants. They're fairly tough for the most part. Okay, any questions to this point? We're going good. Good. Okay, so we'll talk about grooming your plants, taking care of them. Pinching, so many people are so scared to pinch, but you've got to learn to pinch your plants. And it's exactly what it means. You take your fingers and you just pinch right above the leaf node. And you can see this person is pinching off those 2 smaller ones. And what happens when you pinch is plants are driven by hormones. And the hormones out at the very end of each branch are inspiring it to continue on. And when you pinch it, then those hormones are starting to take effect farther back on the branch. So now you'll suddenly see new leaves coming out at other nodes lower down on the stem, which makes for a bushier plant. If you just want one stem coming all the way up straight, then don't pinch. But if you want a nice bushier, thicker, fuller plant, then you just get vicious and get in there and do it. And everybody's so afraid to do it, but don't be afraid. It doesn't hurt the plant, and it's actually very healthy for the plant. So you're controlling the size and fullness. You take the terminal bud right above the node, but never pinch a palm. They have a whole different system. So just let your palm grow. It'll keep growing bigger, but that's what palm trees do. And just take off the lower fronds as they die off. So pruning is different than pinching. Pinching, you're just kind of taking off the tips of things. Pruning, you're going to go in there and actually shape the plant and take off maybe a whole branch if if it improves the shape of the plant. If there's a real disease infestation on one part of the plant, you might cut that whole piece off. If you have a lot of strange roots at the bottom, you might cut some of those off. If you have suckers, you take those out. But stand back and look at it and decide what you should leave, what you could eat. Sort of like when we're pruning outside. So maintenance, take off the old dead leaves, the whole leaf, not just the leaf at the top, take the whole stem, whatever, anything, like with an African violet like this, that flowering stem, don't just take off the flower at the top, yank the whole stem, it'll come right off. But you don't want to leave behind old tissue that'll maybe attract disease. Once flowers have faded on any of the plants, take them off. You're not in the business of making seeds, and they probably didn't get fertilized anyhow. So unless you have a real bug infestation in the house, you're probably not going to get seeds anyhow. And cleaning plants. Now, if you were part of the myths part 2, we talked about cleaning house plants. And I had a list of about 10 different things that you don't use to clean house plants. So the reason you clean a plant is to make it look better. And when it's clean, it can absorb more light. And the air exchanges are better because the stomas aren't clogged with dust. If there's not dirt and dust there, then insects aren't as common. But above all, don't use those plant shine products. Those just clog everything up. Yes, they'll make your plant look shiny and beautiful, but they actually hold on to any dust that gets attracted. So then it's going to be more work to clean them, and they'll clog up the holes on the underside. So stay away from anything like that. All you need is water and a brush for the fuzzy leaf things. Just brush them off with a little soft paintbrush. Otherwise, just water, and a microfiber cloth works great. You can see in this picture, if it's a small enough plant, set it in the sink and give it a shower. Put something over the drain, otherwise all the dead leaves and dirt clog up the drains. But and the next size plant you can put in the bathtub and give them a shower in there. But clean them off, especially look for the undersides of the leaves, because a lot of critters like to hide on the underside. So spray up, not just down. Okay, we're going to just briefly talk about what's wrong with my plant. I have a problem that when something's really wrong with my plant, I just get rid of the plant. But I'm not into nursing a whole lot of things that look too sick. But so water is when they're wilted, we sort of already talked about that, but it can be from too much or too little water. And some plants, just when they're hungry, they'll wilt. But this looks like a peace lily to me, and if that one's watered, it'll probably spring right back up. Sudden loss of leaves. I have a friend who had a Ficus benjamina like this and moved it about 5 feet across her room, and it dropped every single leaf. So things like ficus are very fuss budgety, prissy, but they're wonderful. But they do not like to be moved. And there are other plants too, and they'll just make you pay for it by dropping every single leaf. And then once it's like nanny boo boo, then they'll start putting out all new leaves. So don't totally panic if you've moved it or something, or if it suddenly caught a cold draft, things like that. If it's on top of a heat vent, when the heat comes on in the fall, they might get really unhappy. A lot of plants are fussy about natural gas fumes. And again, moving across the room can do it. This plant is probably showing a nutrient deficiency. More likely it's got root rot. When the tips start turning brown and the leaves start turning yellow, if you pull that out, probably most of those roots are going to be brown and mushy. Could be an infestation of bugs. Mites actually are not, spider mites are not insects, they're spiders. So don't just grab the first thing you see and start spraying away or whatever. Make sure it's a product for use on mites, because insect spray isn't going to touch mites. Aphids, you can generally just wash off with a spray of water. Scale is a problem. Scale is like little hard shells on the stems, and those have to be sort of picked off, or there are some things you can spray on there that'll get under the shells to loosen them up, but plants with scale become a serious problem. And if you've ever had spider plants or palms or things with the long pointy grassy leaves, they tend to get the brown tips, and fluoride is, I think, generally the main problem, but it can be if it's too hot, too dry, if you're not watering it right, or if there's too much salt, you just need to take it and flush it with a whole lot of water. Now those aren't going to rejuvenate, but you just take a scissors to each one of those little tips, and it won't look quite as perfect, but if you really want to start carving pointy ends on each one of them, it'll look almost as good as new. I did some of that this morning. This one is obviously going to be spider mites. That's what they do. They just turn your leaves kind of silvery, because what they're doing is they're eating off the green part and then sucking out the juices. It gets real distorted and curled. This can be all sorts of environmental problems when the leaves get all distorted. And here's the example of the edema, when there's too much water and the plant is just trying to spit out some of that water, and it leaves behind the calcium and the iron and things like that. So if you ever see that on the bottom of your leaf, that means they're too wet. So here's a picture that shows a whole lot of things that can go wrong. It's not on your handout, but there are a lot of things that can go wrong with houseplants, but if you stay on top of them, if you handle them when they first show up, then you can minimize the problem. If you have mealybugs that show up and you don't do anything about it, pretty soon your whole plant is going to be fuzzy white. So just every time you water, check your plants. So especially if you put your plants outside for the summer, when you bring them indoors, you have to clean them off. You might repot them at that point. That'll minimize any eggs and things like that are coming in. When you bring a new plant home from the store or from a plant sale, don't put it right into the middle of your whole collection, because if it's brought anything home, you don't want it to spread. Magnifying glass can help you see all sorts of things you can't see otherwise. Prune out the bad parts. If it's gotten too bad, then just bag it up and get rid of it. Don't put infested plants into your compost, because it might still be there when you're ready to use the compost. And make sure you've identified exactly what the pest is or what the disease is. Don't just go, there's something on my plant, and just grab whatever you have on hand. The U has some really good sites for determining what the pest is, and those are on your handout when you get it. That the website to go directly into the U of M. To identify the problem, and then once you know what the problem is, then you read the label on the pesticide or whatever you're looking at, to know that it works on your specific problem. You have to look repeatedly, because you may kill off the adults, but if the eggs are still there, they're going to hatch out and turn into new adults and lay new eggs. So you might have to, a lot of times the label will say treat every 5 days or 7 days or 10 days or something, and you need to do that, because that's to destroy the ones that have hatched before they can lay a new set of eggs. Make sure your plant is watered before you apply any chemicals. And remember, no misting, because misting gives all the bad guys the nice moist place to survive. So there are a lot of natural insecticides. This insecticidal soap is a very common thing like this. It's a potassium fatty acid soap. It's not Dawn. Don't use Dawn. That's too strong a detergent on your leaf. It strips it of some of its protective barrier. But the insecticidal soaps will take care of some of the bugs without hurting the plant. Neem oil, horticultural oil, work much the same way. You spray it on the plant and it suffocates the bad guys. BT is another one that works very specifically on some very specific critters. So read the label if you decide to use BT. There are a lot of pesticides, a lot of really strong chemical pesticides. A lot of them work, of course, extremely well. Most of them are contact, so that they have to actually hit the pest. Some of them, like bifenthrin, has a residual activity, so it'll stay on the leaf and kill anything that lands there or walks by, whatever. Things like imidacloprid, which is a neonic, becomes systemic. Now, neonics aren't such a problem on houseplants because they aren't out there where the bees and pollinators are. So I don't worry too much about using the neonics on houseplants. And by becoming systemic, then they are out in all the parts of the plant. So if a sucking insect or something starts sucking on any part of the plant, it will get a dose of the poison. So just to show you a few of the bad guys, here's the mealybugs. They just look fuzzy and gross. I mean, they're just they make your plant so unattractive. And a bad infestation of those is just easier to get rid of and start over. Scale, here's a scale. You can see these hard little bodies that attach, and then they're sucking on the plant. Thrips are just these little guys hopping around that just, but they're doing much the same thing as the spider mites. They eat off the green waxy layer of the plant, and then they can get to all the delicious juices. But those are the kind of things you have to, they've laid their eggs, so you have to keep coming after them every few days to get the next generation. Spider mites are a pain in the neck, but you'll see this webby stuff, things like this, that if you start seeing that in your plant, then you've got spider mites and you need to get after it. Maybe if you've got a really bad branch, then it's easy to just cut that branch off and try to control it on the rest of the plant. Aphids, if you're an outdoor gardener, you've certainly seen aphids. A good blast of water will get rid of them. A few sprays of insecticidal soap should take care of it. But again, they've laid their eggs and you have to stay on top of it. Whiteflies are just amazing to me. And I think I've finally solved my problem by putting imidacloprid in. I have several tropical hibiscus that flower beautifully outside. And then when I bring them in, do everything I need to do so that I'm not bringing in critters, I finally, the last 2 years, have started giving them a dose of the imidacloprid, and that seems to have taken care of it. Otherwise, every year, not quite yet, but by February, March, there's these dumb little white flies flying all over the place. And they're just annoying. One of the best ways to deal with them is to, if you haven't treated the soil, is to use the yellow cards, sticky cards, and you can put one of those in each plant or nearby, or even the sticky cards are like the same thing of those, like fly paper. You know, you buy the little cylinder and the fly paper hangs down and then the flies stick to it. So it's really gross, but it does serve the purpose. They're attracted to yellow for some reason. And it's essentially a non-chemical way of capturing and dealing with some of these things. And then we have fungus gnats, which is probably what's flying around in your living room right now, driving you crazy. Fungus gnats live in the organic matter on the top of, or eat the organic matter on the top of your houseplants. And as long as it's damp, they're very happy to live there and lay their eggs. And here's the life cycle. So the adult is what's flying around and lands on your computer screen or buzzes around your head or whatever. They lay their eggs, and 7 to 10 days later, they'll hatch, and you get the larva, and then they pupate, and then they're new adults doing the same thing over and over and over and over. So you can wipe out all the flying ones around, but when those eggs hatch out, you're going to have a whole new batch about 2 weeks or so later. So the trick is to get them before they can lay their eggs. So if you let the soil dry out, not to the point that the plant wilts, but close, the drier it gets, the fewer of these guys you'll have laying eggs in the soil. Or when they get to these levels, maybe they'll dry out and never hatch out into being a full-fledged adult. The yellow sticky traps work really well with these guys. I tend to cut mine up because I don't want the big, huge yellow card, but when you get a good infestation, if you put a little yellow sticky trap around, it captures most of them. You can get a product called Knockout Gnats. It's the BT again. And that will sits on the top of the soil and should deal with them. But I think the sticky traps is the way to go. Fewer chemicals. Okay, so you brought a new plant home. You need to, I can't read the top line again, but check
purchase the right plant for the spot.
Yeah, right plant, right place is what we always say. Don't buy something that's going to need a lot of sunshine if you don't have a south window in a warm spot. But also don't put a snake plant like this one into full sunshine. It's not going to be happy there. So read the tags, know what your light situation is in your house, and then read the tags on the plants. Check the plant thoroughly before you ever buy it. Man, I have set some plants down so fast. Picked up, there was one nursery on Highway 10 many years ago I stopped at, and I couldn't wait to get out of there because I was afraid all the bugs were going to get on my clothes. Every plant was infested with something. You can even, most places shouldn't yell at you if you tip the plant sideways and slide the roots out to see what condition they're in. If they're all rotten or if they're just a horrifically mess of packed roots, yeah, you might want to rethink that one. But get it home quickly this time of year. The reason I'm on Zoom today is because last time we did this, I brought several plants downtown and they all got nipped before I got home. They made the trip down there fine because they went from here in a fairly warm car straight inside. But when we came back out to the car was cold, and just the 7 or 8 blocks to get home, they got nipped. So so get it home. Don't buy some plants and then go do your grocery shopping. Buying the plants has to be the last thing, and you got to go straight home. And then again, isolate it for a while just to make sure you haven't brought any new critters home. So you might have the leaf drop. Don't drown them, but make sure they're adequately watered. Don't fertilize them because plant growers have kept those plants fertilized right to the max so that they put out maximum growth. So don't fertilize for quite a while. And then don't keep moving them around because they may drop their leaves. So sexual propagation, we're probably not going to be doing that at home, mainly because we don't have the pollinators around. You aren't guaranteed when you grow things from seeds, you aren't guaranteed that it's going to match the exact plant. And it's just pretty hard to grow houseplants, especially from seed at home. So most of our propagation is going to be asexual, where you're taking a part of a plant and starting a new plant from that one. So we're going to divide the plants. And we were talking beforehand. My sister, a very good family friend, provided huge Boston ferns for her wedding. So Sally and her husband declared that as long as the ferns were alive, they'd stay married. So they've hit what, 40-year mark or something, 40, 41, because they farmed out pieces of those plants to the siblings, and we've all managed to keep some of them alive. But you just take the plant and you cut it up into chunks or divide. Sometimes you tease it apart. This is a ZZ plant down here, and you can see quite natural pieces to pull apart. You know, these would have all been in one pot. You can pull those apart. Now you've got 4 separate plants. Things like the fern up here. When you open up a fern, you'll see little baby ferns coming, starting at the side. So just take a real sharp knife and cut that piece out and pot it up in a smaller pot. You can get a lot of plants out of one plant. The plant wants to put out the most new growth in the spring, so that's the best time to be doing this. Separate them out, put them into new potting mix in the proper size pot. Don't take one of these guys and put it into the great big size pot that whole thing was in. Start this in a smaller pot. And I can show you, I hope. This is a spider plant that last summer we had a big plant sale, and I had a huge spider plant that I pulled apart into at least half a dozen plants. But I didn't want to cut them back because I'd done it too late, so that they looked like nothing to sell. But the pieces were so huge and sort of flopped over that several of them didn't sell anyhow. So I brought them home and I thought, I'll just repot them. So I potted them up and they still looked horrible. And I thought, I'm going to give them a haircut. So I cut them all off right almost at the soil line. I thought if they grow, they grow. And if they don't, they don't. And this was the one that sat for about 2 weeks before any growth showed. And now, this would be about 4 months later, it's a pretty nice sized plant. So, you know, it was way beyond pinching or pruning. I cut them off at the soil line, and because there's a huge amount of roots down in here, because the plant was so overgrown. So it's got a good strong root system. It just needed to pop something up, and it did. So don't be afraid of cutting back and dividing. And I went to Goodwill, and you can usually buy big carving knives for about 25 cents, 50 cents. Get a good sharp knife, sharpen it up, and just slice right through those root balls. You're good to go. You need what's that top word, Brittany? Rooting
medium.
Yeah, medium. So you can start things in a whole lot of different ways. We talked before about using potting mix, not potting soil. Potting mix will be sterile. So use that to just fill a tray, and you can just poke your what you pinched off or cut off directly into the potting mix. Whatever you're using needs to have water and air and good internal drainage. Now, when we took our core course back in 07, the teacher said, and don't start your cuttings in water, it won't work. And the whole class kind of went, what? Because that's how all of us had always started all our cuttings, was in water. But he maintains that the roots that are started in water aren't as strong as roots that are started in something where they have to push their way through. There's some research that says that's not true, but my experience has been that if you start it in something stronger than water, that when you do pot up your cuttings, I think they establish a little more readily and easily, because first of all, when you're potting them, you're probably potting it with some of that material that you started them in, and they just take off a little bit better. But there's this whole list at the bottom, all sorts of things you can use. So if you're taking the cutting, make sure, first of all, that you don't have any of those insect or disease problems. Take it from a part of the plant that's actively growing. Don't take it from the oldest, most calcified, whatever you want to say, part of the plant. Take some of the new vigorous growth. Cut just below the node. So the node is where a leaf is coming out. So there used to be a leaf there, there used to be a leaf there, there used to be a leaf there. So the cut was made here, right below this node. So the main roots are going to come out here. And depending how deeply you stick it, you might get a second set of roots coming out here. If you are doing something like diamond frost or things that ooze sap, what am I thinking of? Let them, and even things like Thanksgiving cactus, let them dry out a day or two so that they get a callus. Don't cut them and immediately put them into your medium. Keep them humid if you can. Put like a big cake dome over them or a baggie, whatever, depending on the size of the cut. Rooting hormone isn't necessary. I've still got my same jar of rooting hormones, probably 25, well, at least years old. So you don't need much. You just kind of touch the cutting to it and then knock off all the extra, because it doesn't take much. And then keep them warm, keep them bright, and keep them humid. The best way to start cuttings, I think, is to use a 4-size pot. And part of your handout will be the instructions for doing a 4-size pot. It's really easy to use, and it's really easy to maintain. Instead of, having a jar of water, or if you stick things into soil, you got to make sure that soil mix is kept evenly moist. The premise of this is you have a clay pot in the middle, and remember, the water tends to ooze out through the clay into the vermiculite, and it keeps it evenly moist, so those roots never have to dry up or search for water. So probably the hardest part of the whole thing is finding the little tiny clay pot. Things like the dollar store, whatever, this time of year usually have them. You can put a cork in, or I use a squirt of silicone caulk to cover up the hole, because you don't want all the water leaking out the bottom of the hole. You want it to leak through the pores of the clay. You need some horticultural vermiculite. It's a finer grade than builder's vermiculite. And then a container, like a Cool Whip size container, and then something for it to sit in, because you cut some holes in the bottom for the excess water. So you've cut drainage holes in the bottom. You've filled it with the vermiculite. The picture is to just fill the center thing. I like to moisten this a little bit. And then you let it sit till it gets wet. Then use a chopstick or a pencil or something, poke some holes and stick your cuttings in. And you can have all sorts of different kind of cuttings in there. I almost always have some of these going. I actually don't at the moment, but I have several things that need to be pinched. So I'll start one of these pretty soon. Last summer with the plant sale coming up, I think I had 4-size pots going. And in just a few weeks, you'll have a decent root system that's ready to be potted up. And then the plant will take off, because if you start next month, March, whatever, take your cuttings, you'll have really good small plants going next summer. Another way to do it is to take a plastic bag, bagel bags work, or newspaper bags, and fill it up with vermiculite, wet it, let the excess drain out, and then just stab a few holes and poke your cuttings in there. And there's enough moisture in there because of just the volume of the wet vermiculite that it will keep enough moisture to get the roots going. Okay, so different types of cuttings. Just the stem tip, just pinch off whatever you've pinched off. You can root that. The leaf petiole cutting is where you take one leaf of things like African violets or begonias. And look at this one. I'm so proud of this. I don't think Tracy's going to be on today, but did she do she did her thing, wasn't it November, with arranging plants and stuff?
Yeah,
And
it
she
was October and November. Yep.
yeah, she had this tiger
Begonia.
something, I can't remember, begonia. And she
Mhm.
said, and they're fairly easy to root. And I thought, okay. So I made sure we did this at Garden Club. I made sure I got one of these, and I came home, stuck it into potting mix, and look at that. The new baby leaves are coming. Yay. So success.
Tracy is here. She says eyelash begonia.
Eyelash begonia, that was it. But I'm so proud of myself that I got that to start, and fairly rapidly too, actually. The other kind of cuttings you can take are just chunks. Now, the one caveat, if you take a snake plant, you gotta maintain which side is up, because somehow these things won't root if you spit, because this is a long skinny leaf, so you cut sections off, and you have to know that you're putting the lower section of each leaf into the potting medium, because the top of each section won't root, which I think is kind of amazing. But you can succulents sometimes. I mean, this is the way I say do it. I haven't had any luck, but I don't have any luck with succulents. So, but just all you need is one leaf of a succulent, and stick that into the potting mix or the vermiculite, and you should get roots. And then leaf cuttings, you can lay out the whole leaf of a begonia. And if you make a few cuts into the veins, you might get a whole new plant at each one of those cuts. I've never tried that, but that'd be pretty cool if it works. So then you can take a section of the stem, as long as you've got a node at each one, it should root at each one of those nodes. And a lot of these things, like the philodendron, pothos, those practically grow like weeds. So you can easily get those started. Ivies will work that way too. Cane cuttings are a little more interesting if you've got a Dracaena or things like that that grow up and then drop their leaves the taller they get. Then you can still see the node where the leaf was. So you can take a cutting of the main stem, as long as it's got a node. And then you can put these guys, you can put in either standing up or laying down, and they should root at the node and produce a new plant for you. So these plants, it should work on. Christmas cactuses, or Thanksgiving cactuses, or Easter cactuses. We saw that with the Forsyth pot demonstration. You just cut out a chunk, 2 or 3 sections, and put the bottom end into the vermiculite or the mix, and it'll grow roots. And these guys almost always successfully grow roots. And here's your handy little chart to know if you have a Thanksgiving cactus, Christmas cactus, or an Easter cactus. And everything has traditionally been called a Thanksgiving cactus. And they tend to be really pointy leaves. I mean, everybody calls them Christmas cactuses, but Thanksgiving cactuses are what we really tend to see out there. They have the pointy leaves and these beautiful flowers. And I got one that still has the flowers pretty close to shot, but a couple of weeks ago, my big one upstairs was just amazing with flowers, just absolutely amazing, gorgeous. The Christmas cactus, I've never actually gotten a Christmas cactus. I've never seen one for sale around here, but more rounded leaves and a slightly different shaped flower. And then the Easter cactus is very much a round, just slightly dimpled on the edges leaf with a really cool flower. I was so excited when it flowered for the first time last year. A much spikier flower, but they're really, really pretty. So know your cactuses. Some plants make babies on their own. When I worked in gallstone liver research at Mayo, a friend and I were just starting to do houseplants. We were so excited. I drove past a Bachman's every day on my way home from work, and they sold little plants for 79 cents was what it cost to get a house plant. So she and I both started with Chefleras, and they had like three leaflets on each stem. And she got to one with 5 leaflets first, and I was so jealous. So that was the goal, to get more leaflets. But then we went on to spider plants, and my apartment had no light at all. It was hopeless. But hers started making babies, and I was so jealous. But one day I had this stem that came out that was heading to make a baby. So I went into the coffee break that morning. I went, I'm gonna be a mother. And there was one of the doctors was there filling his coffee cup, and he turned around and looked at me. I said, no, my plant. So everybody had a good laugh about me and my plant babies. But these plants all tend to have little babies, and all you have to do is snip them off and set them on the rooting medium. Some of it, like with the spiders, you can, if it works out for you, you can put your little plants around there, and like with a hairpin or a paper clip or something, hold them down on the root before you sever the umbilical cord. And then you're guaranteed that the new baby will have taken root. Over here with the aloe vera, you can see how you would easily break apart the babies here. Air layering, I've done this twice successfully and once not successfully. But again, those same plants that have the nodes, you make a slice into the stem and then put a little toothpick or matchstick or something in there, because if you let it drop back down, obviously it'll try to heal itself. But by keeping it open and then wrapping it with damp sphagnum moss inside, like some saran wrap that you tie top and bottom, and just keep it like that, it will grow roots wherever you cut it. And then you cut it off here and plant everything above as a new plant. But leave this, and chances are somewhere along that stem, it's going to put out new leaves. So you will now have 2 new plants. And some of these things like dracaenas and dieffenbachias get so tall, and all the action is up at the top, that you want to cut it back down. And like with a dracaena, it's kind of nice. You can take this piece and actually plant it down in the same pot if you have a big enough pot. And you can have 2 or 3 or 4 stems going once you've done that a couple of times. So that works. So that's the end. Go grow something. It's summer. Oh, we didn't ever talk about the cleaning the air. So you've probably seen the NASA study where they talk about, NASA studied that, clean the air, blah, blah, blah. And now there are newer studies that show, yes, the NASA study showed that clean the air. They took a 1 cubic meter box and put 1 plant inside, and then they put some toxic, formaldehyde, whatever, in there. And then they had all their monitors to see if and how long it took for the plant to clear out the toxin. And, some plants did, some plants didn't. So they made their list of which plants clean the air better. So then that became this big poster you'll see all over the place of plants that clean the air. But the newer studies are showing, yes, but you need 1 plant every cubic meter in your house in order to move the needle at all on the ability to clean. So if you want to move all your furniture out and move yourself out, you possibly could clean a little bit of the air in your house by having a plant every cubic meter. So, it's one of those things. They're not lying. They clean the air, but not in any efficient way that's going to make any difference in your life. So, can't hurt, might help, but it's not going to really make much difference. So that's all I know.
All right. Thank you, Jackie. We do have a few questions coming in through the chat. The first one is how often do you recommend the water cleaning? Where you put them in the bathtub or wherever?
Cleaning the leaves or leaching out the salt?
I think kind of both, cleaning
Yeah.
the leaves and the salt.
Well, I mean, whenever the leaves are looking really dirty, dusty, I just had a little construction project done here and everything got dusty and needed to be cleaned off. So that was a good opportunity to just hose everything off in the bathtub. You know, whenever they look like they need it for the dust. For the salt, it's when, especially if you have a clay pot, you'll see the salts building up will make like a white residue on the pots. Or on the very top of your soil, you'll start seeing the white residue. Then it's time to flush, do a good flush and until it really rinses out clean.
Okay, thank you. Next up, if they have water with fluoride, would you recommend using distilled water or spring water?
Distilled would be better. Spring water, who knows what's in it. What I've been using is the reverse osmosis water you get at the grocery store, 39 cents a gallon, I think. And again, you don't have to use that on all your plants, but on the ones that are susceptible to brown tips. Because RO water has nothing in it. It's like distilled, but it's a little bit easier process and it's a lot cheaper than buying the jug of distilled water. So if your grocery store has the RO water, that's cheaper.
Okay, sounds good. And then they thought you had mentioned an application that you give plants before bringing them in from being outside. They're wondering if you could spell that name.
I don't know what that refers to. Before bringing them in.
And I don't know if it was a chemical application, but if you just kind of isolate them for a while
Yeah,
and
I mean, imidacloprid is the systemic that you can put on them.
okay.
And the plant will absorb that and kill things off. You can put I've done this sometimes, but I'm not real happy about doing it, like a malathion. I can't think what the names are. Sometimes it's a mixture of a couple different chemicals that you mix up in water and drench the root ball with that, and that should kill off anything that's alive in there. One thing I've done is put some very mild soap like Castile soap or something in a bucket and turn my plant upside down and sort of swish the leaves around, just to knock off anything that's in there. But yeah, I don't like that part of the job of bringing the plants in, because if you don't get everything off, you can have an infestation, but hopefully your plants didn't get too infected over the summer. And it kind of helps if you keep your plants not in contact with the ground, have them raised up a little bit so everything that's crawling in the dirt doesn't get into your plant balls. But
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Let's see. One person says, I have a lipstick plant from my aunt that never blooms, although hers does. What would cause that?
probably light would be my first guess. I have a Hoya plant that never blooms, a wax plant. My mother had it. She'd gotten it from her aunt, so it's probably a plant that goes back over 100 years. Mom's never bloomed. My brother took cuttings from it. He always has about 10 Hoyas blooming like mad in his house. They're gorgeous. I have given people cuttings from my plant. They've taken home in the first year, they're flowering. My son in Chicago, in a small apartment that has terrible light, he'll come home and go, oh, it smells in here. Oh, I guess it's all those wax plant flowers that are blooming. So they're cuttings from my plant, and mine just doesn't flower. I got it to flower once. So all I can figure with mine is it's light. It's just not getting enough light in my house. So I guess I'm jealous. I like lipstick plants. But that, I think that's probably between lipstick plant and maybe not feeding it enough. So I wouldn't go overboard with feeding it, but I'd make sure it's not hungry.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. This person is wondering if you would mind showing the snake plant slide again where you propagated them.
Okay,
I think they wanted to look at that a little more closely.
let's see. This one.
Yep, I think so.
So
Okay,
you can just cut off one of those big long, another name for it is mother-in-law tongue. You just cut off one of the big long leaves and chunk it up and stick it. I've done it in the Forsyth pot with the vermiculite with the nice even watering, and it'll work.
well,
It might not be variegated when it grows back. It might be, but it might revert to just solid green.
okay. Got it. Thank you. And let's see, last question I have in the chat right now. I have a couple of plants in my second floor. It's warm there during the winter and so in the summer. Is too much warmth harmful to plants, particularly a snake plant?
Snakes don't like to be wet. They really need to completely dry out before you water them again. Because I was gonna say, if it's too warm, probably the biggest danger is that they'll get too dried out too quickly. But a snake plant likes to be dry. So for most plants, we would say stick your finger in at least past the first knuckle, should be dry before you ever water again. But a snake, you can let it go way deeper than that before you water it. They just don't like to be watered. So I think you can probably get away with that in a fairly warm spot.
Okay.
But plants don't like to be, like, if you're in forced air, they don't want to have that hot air blowing right on them. Or sitting on top of a radiator is probably going to be too hot for them too.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. Okay, a little more clarification on the application before bringing plants in. They're pretty sure you said it was to prevent the white flies that would inevitably appear later.
Yeah, see, I use the imidacloprid.
Okay, can we, what, did you have that on a slide or do you know? I think,
Let's see.
or do you know how to spell it so I could put it in the chat? I'm not sure. Or I can do a little Google search and email this person too.
I guess I don't even have it on the white flies.
Okay.
Here, it's down here. Trying to
Oh,
think,
okay.
what's the
IMIDA.
what's the trade name for it? Can't think of it. But you can get it in a granular form for houseplants. That's what I've got now. And so you put like a teaspoon of it in the pot. Yeah, you really need to get them off, really clean the plant as well as you can, because it takes like 2 weeks or so for this to get into the plant system. So you don't want to take an infested plant and think that that's going to solve the problem, because you'll get a few more generations. But if you start out with a clean plant and put that in, that should help. And again, the yellow sticky traps will, if you keep catching the adults when they hatch out, then you can catch them before they lay eggs. And then eventually you'll have wiped out the population. But letting the top of the soil dry out too is your best bet. I have tried with some success putting a layer of sand on the top of houseplants that are having problem with because they're feeding on the peat or the whatever the organic component of your potting mix is. So if you have a layer of sand, that's not organic. And that will make them go find some other plant to be on, but I'm not sure that's university endorsed, so
Mhm.
take it with a grain of salt.
Got it. Thank you. Let's see. What is the best method to keep plants alive when you go on vacation and do not have someone to water them? Do the glass bulbs work?
Yeah, that helps. Probably what helps the most is group them together as much as you can.
Okay.
The bathtub can be a good place as long as you got a fairly sunny bathroom. I know when my son comes, he puts his in the bathroom, I think, and even puts like a plastic bag over them, clear one, so that they can still get light. But anything
Okay.
you can do to keep the humidity in. Water them well before you go, but don't water them so that they're standing in water. Water them and drain that off. And build a mini greenhouse for them, something that'll keep them from being dried out. Yep.
I had to plug in quick so my battery didn't die, but I
Oh,
think that we're about, any questions in person? Just have Sally and Christine left.
oh, wow. We went overtime.
We covered a lot. All right, well, lots of good feedback in the chat. Thank you, everybody. And next month will be Dan Lee presenting on hydroponic gardening. So yeah, thanks, Jackie. It was lots of great
Thank
info as
you.
always.
Good.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.